All right, hopefully the shiur is not going to take too long. I feel like I start that every Tanya shiur with that sentiment. And hopefully this time it'll back up work and we'll keep it to under half an hour. I'm trying to whittle it down so that Anyhow, b'chulu. We are going to be discussing Perek Lamed Beis in Tanya. Perek Lamed Beis is a fascinating chapter. It's, I think, probably the chapter that most people learn for the first time if they grow up in the Chabad system. It's almost like Alter Rebbe. You start with Chumash Vayikra when you're in Cheder, or at least that's the official Seder. Maybe by that Reinfurnish, there's some vestige of that. Nowadays, I don't know if the Chabad Chadarim are doing that, but they definitely are starting in the middle of Tanya, with the leave of Tanya, everyone calls it. And it's a very interesting chapter because it is, if you say seemingly superfluous, which is a funny thing to say about Avas Yisrael, it doesn't fit into the grand scheme of Tanya. Tanya is again here to explain Kikar V'Dachad Davar Me'id. It seems like Perek Lamed Beis is more parenthetical of a remark, and I believe that there are Mahadura Kamos or something like that actually don't contain Perek Lamed Beis, because again, Perek Lamed Beis is parenthetical. It's saying that based on what we discussed in Perek Lamed Aleph, going back to Perek Chav Tes, so based on those concepts, a person is able to have a very easy way to achieve the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael. Now, there's a lot of different ways that I can start the shiur after that introduction. I think that the way that I would choose to start it is by going all the way to the end. And at the end of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe says in brackets, I have a whole thing about the brackets. I might have mentioned that before. I don't know if I'll ever end up doing a shiur on it. But the Maisa, there are brackets at the end. And after the whole thing explaining to us Avas Yisrael and why it's always important to love Yid and even people that are doing Averis, etc., even if you need to hate them, you still need to love them, the Alter Rebbe finishes off and he says, Amar David HaMelech al Vashalim Tachla Sinas Nesim V'Gamer Ela Al Haminim V'Apikursim She'in Lehem Chilik V'Lekei Yisrael K'lis V'Gemara Reish Perek Zayin the Shabbos. So he says that which David HaMelech said in Tehillim Tachla Sinas Nesim Lo'ivim Hayuli, that I hated them with the ultimate hatred. So when David HaMelech said this, he wasn't referring to a regular Yid. Even a regular Yid that does Averis, which you would imagine is maybe a regular Yid. But he wasn't saying it about someone that does Averis, Chas v'Shalom. He was saying it about Yidin, that they're minim, they're apikursim, which have their own halachic darim, etc. What they are is complicated, and not really necessarily the subject over here. The point is that there are people that David HaMelech hated, and it was only about them, and the reason why is because they don't have a chilik v'lekei Yisrael, based on everything that's discussed in Perek Lamed Beis. By the way, when I give this shiur, I assume that you're already familiar with the Tanya. I might quote the Lashon in order to better properly understand it. But I assume that you're familiar with Perek Lamed Beis. If you're not, go ahead and learn Perek Lamed Beis. So the reason why is because they don't have a chilik v'lekei Yisrael, and the whole point of Perek Lamed Beis is that based on what we said in Perek Lamed Aleph, that essentially we should try to live neshama life, and we should appreciate neshama life, that really we have a body and we have a soul, and most people's natural inclination is to view themselves as being their body, even though tzaddikim, they have to view themselves as being their soul. But nevertheless, we should strive to view our lives in the lens of the soul and try to appreciate the soul in life, the soul's perspective. And so the Alter Rebbe says when you do that, you have the concept of Avas Yisrael, because everyone has a neshama, so you love everyone, etc. Learn Perek Lamed Beis. The reason why it's seemingly fine to hate a min and apikeres is because they don't have a chilik v'lekei Yisrael. And that's what David HaMelech says. Tachlis sinas anisim. Now, Alter Rebbe says other kinds of sinah, that you have some sinah, some ava. Over here, tachlis sinah, ultimate hatred. David HaMelech has ultimate hatred for these yidden. And the reason why is because they don't have a chilik v'lekei Yisrael. My question is like this. Is this taka how it's supposed to be? Is this taka how it's supposed to be? That if you have a yid and he's taka and a taka apikuris, do you have that nowadays? No. Let's say it's a theoretical example, but you would have a yid and he's pasha completely off the derech. Not just off the derech, but he's fighting against Yiddishkeit, chas v'shalom. Is this person to be hated? That's the question that I want to, in theory, explore. Really, there's a lot more that I want to explore, but I think that's a good opening entrance point. So, once we're there, I think that it's important to look at the whole pack. Again, you got to learn the pack. But the point that I want to bring out is that seemingly the Alter Rebbe is not saying that this is the reason for Avas Yisrael. The Alter Rebbe says, you have now a good way to appreciate the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael. As in, Hashem commanded Avas Yisrael. Why Hashem commanded Avas Yisrael? I can give a lot of good reasons. It makes Yiddishkeit, go round. It makes the world go round. Getting along with people makes the world go round. It's how society is formed, etc. And particularly for Yidden, for Yiddish society, a point happens to be the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael. When you look at Talmudic sources, you look at, there's not too many halachic sources that discuss it. The Rambam discusses it. The Torah debatably put those chapters from Hilchos Deis of the Rambam into the Torah. Possibly didn't, possibly was censored or not censored. There was a lot of strong feelings in the times of the Rishonim about the Rambam's Sefer Hamada B'chlal. So whether or not that was put in, L'maisa, there's maybe in Siman Kuf Nun Vav that some of these things are mentioned, particularly in the Magen Avraham. The Alter Rebbe has, I think I might have mentioned that before, and I don't want to get into the whole thing, but there is attributed to the Alter Rebbe, Siman Kuf Nun Vav, where these things are briefly discussed. L'maisa, what do we learn from Avos Yisrael? So you have a few limudim. You have that you shouldn't marry a woman without seeing her first, because if you marry a woman through a shliach and you don't see her first, then you might see her. You'll think that she's ugly, and then you're gonna end up being over on Avos Yisrael when you're with her. This is one thing that we learn from Avos Yisrael. Halacha in Hilchos Avos Yisrael. If you make a Shulchan Aruch, you'd add in a new siman. You'd add in siman Tafresh Tzadik Ches into Erech Chaim, and you'd put in Hilchos Avos Yisrael. This would be one halacha in Hilchos Avos Yisrael. There's lots to discuss on this subject, and I'm going to hold myself back. I'm not going to talk about it more. I'm just mentioning briefly Rashi Prakim. You have that you're buried a Misa Yafa for people when they're Chayiv Misa. A person is Chayiv Sreifa, for example. Bas Kain is Chayiv Sreifa. So when you're doing Sreifa, you could burn her alive. Chas v'shalom. That would be very painful. We don't want to cause pain to Yid. Why? Because Avos Yisrael, she's Chayiv Sreifa, she was Mizanes, Aviyah Mechalalas. But at the end of the day, she's still a Yid. Dafal Pishachat Yisrael, who are now Yisrael, and we have to Recha Kamecha. Recha B'Torah Mitzvahs, is that actually a line somewhere? Is a little bit complicated. But not Recha B'Torah Mitzvahs. There's Amisecha. We're going to get to that later. As I'm jumping the gun. Recha is seemingly just a Yid. Lesashik is Recha applies across the board, and to all Yidin, even if they're very various. This is not the case with every monistic mitzvah. Anyway. Right. I don't want to get too caught up in all of the details. Avos Yisrael, we learn that barely misa yafa, and that's why instead of burning her alive, which is seemingly a very painful death, what we do is we pour hot lead down her throat, and it's burning, it burns her, but it's so quick, it's in the internal organs right away, she's gone in a second. So it's a better misa, barely misa yafa. You choose a better death than Avos Yisrael. And this and the like, I don't even know if there are too many other examples of halacha that we learn from Avos Yisrael. This is the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael. Seemingly, it is to not cause an affliction to other people. You have the famous thing with Hillel, which is brought in this chapter of Tanya, that say the entire Torah on one foot. Don't do to your friend that which you don't want to be done to you. And it seems to be taka that these are the examples the Gemara says. I don't know if this verse is necessarily directly connected to Avos Yisrael. Obviously, the connection is an obvious connection, but I don't know that it's explicitly connected in the Gemara at least. But it's the story about the ger, and Hillel obviously was known for Avos Yisrael. We quote him a few times in Paraklamid Beis. So this is a vart that is important. Essentially seems to be the driving force behind Avos Yisrael. That which you do not want for yourself, do not do unto others. You do have, interestingly, you have the statement of Rabbi Akiva that you have then the statement of Ben Azai that Zet Sefer Tolis Adam is seemingly, he says that it's a greater statement than that. And the question then means, what does Ben Azai mean? You could argue, in theory, that Ben Azai would hold that maybe the idea of loving everyone is a mitzvah. It says it's Zeh Sefer Tolis Adam, and so it means that we're all, together. I don't want to explore that avenue necessarily, because again, I'm here for understanding the Alter Rebbe, his opinion, what's going on in Paraklamid Beis. This is an in-depth shiur of Paraklamid Beis, and not a shiur on Avos Yisrael, and I'm going to need to keep on reminding myself of that point. So, now that we're here, we have a little bit of an understanding of what Avos Yisrael is. But ultimately, besides for the particular details of the halacha, you have the overarching principle of Avos Yisrael, that which you don't want to be done to you, don't do to your friend. And it is essentially just the idea of simply what it says in the pasuk, that you should love your friend. Now, we have the question of how do you command about Ahava. This is a question that's asked thousands of times in Chassidus. I can't say that I've seen it with my own eyes thousands of times, but I think at least hundreds of times I actually can say that I've seen it. It comes up in so many Maimarim, in Likutei Torah and Tir'er, and across B'chlal Maimarim in general. How could you command for love? And the simple answer is two kinds of love. There's love that's an innate feeling or a feeling that's given from above, and that love Yutaka can't control. But the love that's through a Spainus, that Yutaka, you're misspaining in the godless of Hashem, etc. This is about Avos Hashem. You're misspaining in the godless of Hashem, and when you have that, naturally it's going to be born that you love Hashem. It's going to be born within you that you love Hashem. And so you would say a similar verse with Avos Yisrael, that you appreciate that everyone is taka avech b'chulana, that we all have a neshama and we're all connected. Through the neshama, you get to love everyone. Seemingly, this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. Is this the reason for Avos Yisrael? You could find that it is the reason, but from a halachic sense, is this necessarily the reason? Ashken Ashalo. Maybe yeah, maybe no. The Alter Rebbe is just coming to know, based on what he says. He says that it's a derech yishar of a kala, love yidei kiyum mitzvahs after derech hakamecha. It's an easy way to come to Avos Yisrael. The Eibusher is able to be greater that you should love Yidin v'chlal, whether or not it's because of their neshama or not because of their neshama. Even if you have a mitzvah say and it's a shimtinish kabbalistically, it's still a mitzvah say. It's still a mitzvah. You're still fulfilling a mitzvah. You have the idea that you could have a contradiction between halacha and Kabbalah. You have cute vart that's in Shara Shmo. It's published nowadays in the end of Chelik Vav of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that they're publishing. If I'm not mistaken, it's somewhere over there. That it says that they asked Alter Rebbe, when you have a Chikkas Kabbalah and Halacha, what do you follow? The Alter Rebbe said Kabbalah. So they said, well, you wrote in your Shulchan Aruch in Hilchas Tefillin that you're supposed to follow Halacha. So the Alter Rebbe said, Take and Halacha, that's what you say. Right? A halachicist will say that you follow Halacha over Kabbalah. But a Kabbalist would say you follow Kabbalah over Halacha. There's a lot to be said again on that subject, but ultimately, when you have a difference between halacha and Kabbalah, that's what you follow. And seemingly, you would say, if you would say taka, if you would follow the logic through, and you would say that obviously Yisrael taka is a mitzvah, even if you hate someone, or not if you hate someone, even if you have someone that's pasha or balaveris and a minute and not bikaris, etc., then notwithstanding the point that you don't have this easy route to loving them, that the Alter Rebbe is talking about, that a kalav yishar, a light and straight route, but it doesn't matter. You still have a mitzvah to say that Isa. I would argue, just at very face value, that this is taka the halacha. This is taka the halacha. You don't see that the Rambam makes any distinction when he talks about the mitzvahs based in between an apikeres or not an apikeres, if that would taka be the case. If it would taka be the case, the mitzvah of Yisrael doesn't apply to an apikeres, and you would say, barely mitzvah yafa doesn't apply. If you have an apikeres, someone that's an apikeres, it's not like the declaration of apikursus is something that you necessarily get killed for. It's definitely a big chutzpah to Yiddishkeit, but it's not like the declaration of Apikursus is something that there is a prescribed misa space in for. You would say maybe kind of in pagan way. With that being said, let's say you have Seifa. The skill you also have. I feel like Seifa is an easier example, just it's mamish across the board in every scenario. You have Seifa. A person is, let's say, chayav Seifa, an Apikuris. It doesn't say, if he's an Apikuris, then you're not bitter misa yafa. We don't say that. We don't say that simply. We don't say that. And is it easier to burn someone alive? I don't know if it's easier to burn someone alive. Maybe you could say that you plug a Rabbanon, but you would feel like this is the kind of thing that if you have Takin Apikeres, then you should at least have some kind of mention in it. But it's not mentioned seemingly in Paiskim. You could give a lot of reasons for why it's not necessarily such a good proof, but at least it's something that puts me to lean on that side. Especially because when it comes to Mesis, we don't say that. And with the Mesis, there's, if I'm not mistaken, 4 mitzvahs regarding how you're not supposed to protect the Mesis, you're not supposed to love them, you're not supposed to seek out their good. There's a lot of things that you're not supposed to do for a Mesis. A lot of ways that you're supposed to hate a Mesis. And we still don't say this part. We still don't say a Mesis that in any scenario where taka could be that we say about skila certain things that are barely misa yafa, and we still don't make any point about a Mesis that we should try to not be buried in misa yafa. And if there would be any person that you would say is a person that you wouldn't apply Avos Yisrael to, a Mesis, and a Mesis that's an Apikuris also, if you want to say about this part. But, I mean, you could say a Mesis that's an Apikuris would seem like something that's a little bit obvious. Not necessarily, depending on the definition of Apikuris or a min. But anyhow, I digress. My point is that it seems that Avos Yisrael, Taka does apply across the board to everyone. How that fits with David HaMelech at the end, as Hashem, we'll get back to that. But that's not really the juice of what I'm getting at. All of this is an introduction. This is all an introduction to the point that I want to bring out, the more niglah'dike point in the Tanya. Obviously, the niglah'dike point is going to end up coming back around in the end, as Hashem. So, looking a little bit further in Tanya, after he discusses all of the points about how you're actually supposed to appreciate this, and then the Alter Rebbe gets a little bit into the Gemara. He says in the Gemara, someone that sees their friend that they sin, it's a mitzvah to hate them, and also to tell their teacher that they hate them. So, just to be fair, it's actually not agreed across the board that is takat halacha. I mean, that at least in the Gemara, it's not. It's a machlekes between Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, if I'm not mistaken, as well as Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak. And Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak is of the opinion that it's only mutter. And they talk about the famous case of Tovia Chat and Zug and Nagin, and if you want to look it up, it's in Maseches Pesachim Daf Kuf Yud Gimel, if I'm not mistaken. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says mitzvah listeners, and he says not only that, but to tell your teacher if you're believed kivei trei by your teacher. What that means, I'll get to in a second. If you believe kivei trei by your teacher, then it's actually a mitzvah to tell him, so the teacher can hate the person as well. What does it mean that you're believed kivei trei? So again, I'm going to try to not get too sidetracked, but essentially you have a difference between edus and ne'emonos. But if you tell someone something, if they're not sure about it, then you're just being mitzi shemra. If your teacher, Taka, believes you kivei trei, that means that you have complete ne'emonos, as though whatever it is that you're saying is forcibly acceptable and based. And that is to say that when you tell them something, the Taka and mamash believe you, as though you were witnesses testifying about it, then you tell your teacher. Why? Because when you tell your teacher, it's not just tam mitzi shemra. You know that it's Taka going to be niskabel and that the teacher is going to follow through halachically what the right thing to do. According to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, it's a mitzvah to hate them. So therefore, there's a tayeles in telling your teacher. If you stop telling your teacher, the teacher's not going to hate the person because after you hate the person, it's they're not believed kivei trei. And so it's also going to be an avera of mitzi shemra because you told the teacher or something, and now the teacher's going to be suspicious about the guy, even though he's not going to hate him because he's not allowed to hate him. Because why would he hate him just because one person said that there's taka a problem? Essentially, the idea of tavichot is a given night. So this is the idea that the Alter Rebbe says, and I think that maybe the reason why he didn't elaborate on the idea that the teacher needs to be kivei trei is, I think, to bring out that he's only trying to bring out the most extreme. As in, Shmuel Bar Yitzchak would say motu l'snei. The Alter Rebbe could say, okay, motu l'snei doesn't mean that you taka need to. It just means that you're not chayav for it. Fine, but really you still have the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael. Elamai mitzad sinor. It's okay, so it would be bittul aseh, but it wouldn't be also to hit him. It says it's a lav. You're not allowed to. So ultimately, the Alter Rebbe, I think, is just bringing out the point that even the most chomerdike opinion that not only are you allowed to hate him, but you're actually even allowed to tell your teacher, that's how much of a mitzvah it is to hate the person. So the Alter Rebbe would say, in that case, what's not going to deal with Avas Yisrael? Avas Yisrael is seemingly applying across the board. So the Alter Rebbe says something very interesting, and I think this is the word that I want to be focusing on a little bit. He says that it's referring to chaveri b'teira mitzvahs, someone that's your fellow in Torah and mitzvahs, and you already fulfill the mitzvah of echech samisecha. And what does it mean, es samisecha? It means im she'itcha b'teira mitzvahs. Just to note, this idea of amisecha being a contraction of im she'itcha b'teira mitzvahs, that was someone who's with you in Torah mitzvahs, is not said about echech samisecha in any place that I found. I could be missing it, and if anyone does know of such a place, please let me know. It does come up in two other contexts. It says that that you should judge your amisecha favorably, and and there's a question about someone told someone else, I forget what, maybe Rav Papa, I'm blanking on the names, but someone told someone that such and such a person who's coming before you for Din Torah is a Talmud Chacham, and he's wondering what's the reason why he's saying that, and ultimately decided the reason why is either so that he should give his case precedence, that he doesn't have to wait as long, and that would be an application of a Sedek Lishvat HaMisacha, or it would be that if you have Shoda the Daini, that is to say that Beis Din sometimes has the ability to decide based on logic. For example, let's say one person leaves everything that they own to a certain guy named Tovia, just say for example. So two guys named Tovia come and they both say, we think that we're the guy Tovia, that the guy meant to leave everything to. And they come to Beis Din and they want to rest the halacha. So sometimes you look, and if there's a very obvious thing pointing to the fact that it should be this Tovia or the other Tovia, one of them has a raya, like mamish, the guy wrote down, when I said Tovia, I meant Tovia Pliny. So then in that case, you give it to him. But what happens if it's just two random people? So you try to look at miles, a karev, a shachin, different things like that. So top mila would be that if a person is a Talmud Chacham, you're going to lean towards assuming that this is the person that everything was meant to be left to. So sometimes Beis Din has discretion. And so for discretion, someone who's on a high level of Torah mitzvahs, someone that's with you, if you're a dayan, you're on a decent level of Torah mitzvahs, someone that's with you in Torah mitzvahs gets a certain amount of precedent in a court case in one of these two ways. This is one idea of Pesach Keshver, and the other one is it says and this is the idea also expressed in the Gemara that a no only applies to someone that's with you in Torah mitzvahs. This is a discussion in Pesachim. It's not the simplest point, but at the end of the day, there's also a drasha in the Gemara to this effect. It's a lot easier to say it by these two things, because when you say a person that's doing an avera, it seems pretty inherent in things. that, as a matter of fact, they're not with you in Torah and mitzvahs. You could say that you're talking about Avera also, and why you're being so medayik and why you're being so medayik and if you're talking there, you could fire for it. But it seems a little bit puzzling to say that this vart would be said about tzedek tishbis samisacha, and this vart about liseinu ishas amisay. I feel like I'm saying it wrong now. Anyhow, but it feels a little bit funny to say that this would be said about someone that's with you in Torah mitzvahs, b'shas they're doing an Avera. But then the Alter Rebbe says, he drops a line, and I think that this line comes to redeem it a little bit. That it's referring to someone even nevertheless they're not doing tshuva from their chaytan, as it says in Sefer Chayim. Now, I want to point out the context of the pasuk of it says we mentioned that before. Then it says that you should rebuke your friend and do not carry against him a sin. What does it mean, carry against him a sin? The Chachamim say it means to whiten his face with embarrassment. You yell at someone publicly, they're going to become embarrassed. Now, you have an interesting halacha, which is that this is only the case when it's bein adam lachaveri. If you whiten someone's face because you're rebuking them for things that are bein adam l'makim, it's fine. This is what the Rambam paskins, if I'm not mistaken, in Hilchos Deis, and there's a little bit of a discussion, but it seems to be people just accept this. And when you look at the context of the pasuk, it seems to make a lot of sense. Because the sisters seemingly, when you look at it at face value, is not referring to Averis, that you hate a person for doing an Avera. What it means that Chaim Yankel gave you a funny look, and now you think Chaim Yankel hates your guts. And so, you don't like Chaim Yankel either, because Chaim Yankel doesn't like you. Why do you like Chaim Yankel? So you hate him. You have a mitzvah to get up there and tell Chaim Yankel, and not get up there, but to go over to Chaim Yankel and to say, Chaim Yankel, I have a problem with you. You looked at me funny. I get the feeling that you hate me, and I want to let you know. It makes me feel very uncomfortable. This is the mitzvah of L'sisen Sachicha B'Vavecha. It's an Avera to hate someone, but it shouldn't be B'Vavecha. The Rambam says that if you decide to forgive it on your own, you're able to forgive it on your own, and you don't have to go over to him. The point is just that it shouldn't be hidden in your heart. That's how grudges get out, and a lot of people talk about the idea of why L'sisen Sachicha B'Vavecha functions exactly the way that it does, but it makes sense. Then you say, what are you supposed to do instead of the assistance of You're supposed to go over them and tell them, Chaim Yankel, I have a kevil in the alecha. This is what you're supposed to do. In a practical sense, seems to be that if you have a personal grudge against someone, you're supposed to tell them about it. And then it makes a lot of sense. Why are you not allowed to whiten their face? When you have a personal problem with them, then you're going to go in public, you're going to embarrass them because you have some perceived problem with them. You can't do that. But when we're talking about this in another context of Kodesh things, the assistance of is also in Kodesh. And also and also the sister love kind of falls away. And there's rayas from that, and the fact that it's done practically. You could look in Rambam. I think it's Parak Vav Hilchos Deis, so I could be mistaken about that. So, time-wise, I think we're doing decent. This is the idea that you have in Sefer Chayim. Sefer Chayim says that not only is it that you have the mitzvah, bein adam l'chaveri, which you can easily understand from the Pesachim, but you could also understand from the Pesachim, that's what the Sefer Chayim does, that the mitzvah also applies bein adam l'makim. Elamai, it doesn't carry through all the way to the end of l'sis alav chet. You can say ultimately that you're not sinning against them in the context of halbanas panim, because it has nothing to do with you. It's not your personal vendetta. You're trying to uphold the Eibusher, etc., etc. Also, seemingly doesn't apply. Why? Firstly, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, he holds that it's not only a mutter, but it's a mitzvah. So, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, he learns it from a pasuk, not like a pasuk in Torah, but a pasuk in Tanakh still. At the end of the day, it's a pasuk in Mishlei. Yes, Avaya Seinira, Sinasra, or something like that. So, this is so the idea of the assistance of Chicha B'Lavacha seemingly doesn't apply again when you have a person that you have a reason to hate them. Rav Nachman Yitzchak would say it's even a mitzvah. Shmuel Bar Yitzchak would say that it's mutter. So the assistance of Chicha B'Lavacha doesn't apply. Elamai, what do you have? You still have a chayach dechech samisach. And this is why the Alter Rebbe is quoting Sefer Chayim, and this is the that I'm mainly trying to bring out. The Alter Rebbe quotes Sefer Chayim. He says that a chayach dechech samisach applies even in this context. How could you say that a chayach dechech samisach applies even in this context? Why? You have a mitzvah to hate him. You're trying to get rid of it. You're trying to get rid of the mitzvah to hate him. So you could say it's the context of trying to help the person out. And this is really what it is. But at the end of the day, what's the mitzvah coming to include? What's the mitzvah coming to accomplish? To put it in other words, if there's no problem with hating the guy, why do you need to tell him off? Just leave it be. Leave it be. You're taking away the leisisa of chait. You're taking away the leisisa of chicha bilvavecha. Not only is it, you're taking it away, you're making it a mitzvah to hate him in your heart. So what's the mitzvah coming to show? This is, I would say, the Alter Rebbe is a in the Sefer Chedim. If you have the while you don't have leisisa of chait, and you don't have leisisa of chicha bilvavecha, what is coming to say is that it takes precedence. Before you're able to hate the guy, is coming to tell you, you're not allowed to hate him until you taka him. That's taka the din. If you don't have the hoichacha, you don't have the mitzvah to be saying. Otherwise, if you have a mitzvah to be saying, there's no problem of being saying that you need to come and then remedy the problem with the Normally, in the regular context, the most basic of basic context, it's about ben adam lachaveri. If it's ben adam lachaveri taka, you have a problem with hating him, right? Therefore, don't go too far. If it's ben adam lamakim, taka isn't going to apply. Is also seemingly it would be a good question if taka the law applies. Possibly to hate a yid who's doing an avera without being meichiach them, possibly the law applies. But at the end of the day, it must be that if you're holding that applies, even if you have a person doing an avera when there's opinions that it's a mitzvah listenaisa, it's pasha a mitzvah to hate them. If you say that it's mitzvah listenaisa, you just say, okay, choose Avos Israel anyway. It's mitzvah to say. Don't mean mitzvah to say. But if you have a mitzvah pasha to hate them, it must be that is coming to tell you that you need to rebuke them first. Then, as far as the details of the rebuke, you have machlekes Rambam and Smag. Is it until hitting? Is it until cursing? But this is the idea that you have. Then the Alter Rebbe said he dashes this in what Hillel says, and he says, he dashes this in what Hillel says that no, it's not a dash in what Hillel says. He says that someone that isn't your friend, you don't have the idea of a chech. Why? Because Alter Rebbe applies the drasha now to this person. Now you would say, hold up, how could I say if he doesn't, if he's not with me, he's obviously doing averis. If you're not on his level, says Alter Rebbe, you don't have a chech. Taka, you're right. Because you don't have a chech, therefore you can't come to hating him. Why? Because you didn't do the chech first. By the way, is it also to hate a yid? Seemingly, no. It's only also to hate a yid if it's in it in your heart. If you do the chacha, you go to Chaim Yankel and you say, Chaim Yankel, you looked at me funny. At that point, what's to hate him? Is it a good thing? Absolutely not. Definitely not. I'm not encouraging hatred. But is it a lav? Seemingly not. You're totally fine. And the Rambam says, Taka, it seems to be implied in his words that the Torah's only problem is that you're holding it in your heart. And this is what the Torah seems to imply when it says, so seemingly what it is that you need haichacha in order to have the heter to hate, and that applies side with bein adam lachaver and side with bein adam lakim, and the thing doesn't change. Elamai, when it's bein adam lachaver, it's much easier to say Why? Because you're both on the same level. Just because Chaim Yankel looked at you funny doesn't mean that he's a Rosh Merusha, even though a lot of people would like to think that in their personal grudges. But at the end of the day, you could be, but it's called a Torah mitzvah very easily. But if you're going to say, even when he's doing a various taka, he needs to either be on your level and that you see yourself on his level, which, by the way, Tanya gives a lot of basis for how you can well judge a person in regards to their standing in Torah mitzvahs in a very favorable and positive way. It's in Parak Lamed, if I'm not mistaken, a couple chapters earlier, so you could say maybe it ties in also a little bit. But ultimately, the idea is that you're not allowed to hate a person unless you rebuke them. And until you see yourself on their level to be able to rebuke them, you're not able to come to that idea of hating. Because you're not able to rebuke. And this is the idea of Alter Rebbe. Again, I think it's more of a drasha that Hillel Zakin says you should be from the Samidim of Aaron, neigh Shalom, Reiv Shalom, if it's based on carbon lateral. And he says even someone that's only called a Beria, that's how far they are. But nevertheless, you need to bring them close. And you would say the Alter Rebbe is saying dafka that you need to bring them close because there's no way to rebuke them properly. And then you could rebuke them maybe in a nice way, etc. But the proper mitzvah of echech doesn't apply. Now that we're here, the Alter Rebbe says after that point that you can have sino and alva at the same time. He says, regardless of all of these mitzvah, you can get rid of this whole conversation. The Alter Rebbe is coming to let you know an important detail about, practically speaking, why it's virtually impossible to ever come to this mitzvah of sinah. It's a theoretical conversation in the Gemara, basically. Because you need to see yourself on his level in order to rebuke him. If you're seeing yourself on his level, you're still not able to love him. Okay. But the Alter Rebbe says, nevertheless, even someone that attacks his mitzvah, you still have a mitzvah to love them. Why can't you love someone and hate them at the same time? A love-hate relationship, it's bittersweet. It's the kind of thing that attack exists. And so the Alter Rebbe says that it's still a mitzvah to love them. And Adarabba, it's such a pity on them. The same way that you pity yourself with your neshama, your nitzvah, that's being that there's a helam b'hester that's stopping you from appreciating it. Okay? This guy too, why should you hate him? You should love him. Same way that you would love yourself. Going back to the original question of David HaMelech alav hashalim, hating the Yidden with tachlis sinas nesim, is this the right attitude to be having? I would Tanya, and you could say v'derech efsher, I would Tanya this is not the attitude to be having. David HaMelech did it, and David HaMelech is a king, he has his own cheshbonis, he also lived before Chassidus Chabad. The mitzvah of Avos Yisrael is seemingly, according to Chassidus Chabad, something that is at the pinnacle of not only what it means to be a Yid, not only what it means to follow Torah, not only what it means to be a Yid, but just the essence of why we're here and what we're here for. If I had to bring it a little bit into context, how are we doing time-wise? Not too bad. I'll try to cut it at 35, that's Hashem. To give it a little bit of context, Yono, when he heard about the Yidden, there's a lot of things to be said about this story, but Yono, when he heard, not about the Yidden, when he heard about niglah'dike, it was about niglah'dike. He heard about niglah'dike. He thought it could be bad for the Yidden, and what did he do? He ran away. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a mitzvah? Is it asur? Cheshbon doesn't need to be there. At the end of the day, he thought it was bad for the Yidden, and so he ran away. He didn't want to have the nevuah. He didn't want to go on the shlichus from the Eibishter. There's an idea that Avraham Avinu was overjoyed when he, after the Bris Bein Abasarim, not just because of the Beseder that he got, that he's going to have kids and all of the good things that he's going to be getting, but because of the fact that he Pashat had a Gilui of Elikos. He was a Navi, the first Jewish Navi. Yonah had a Nevuah, and he ran away from Nevuah because he wanted to be able to help the Yidden and protect them. Moshe Rabbeinu, in Parshas Kisisa, he broke the Luchis and he started arguing with the Eibishter. Hashem said, Pashat, a command directed to Moshe Rabbeinu, let me go, leave me be. And Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayichal Moshe, and he starts fighting with the Eibishter. What does this mean? Loving a Yid is at the top, it's at the pinnacle of what we can do. Even a Yid, even an Ebed David Zara. It doesn't make a difference. We always try to look out for and we always try to protect Yidden. Davar Melech hatachlas sinas, and whatever the reason for that is not known to me. I don't know what it is. He wrote it into him, and it's taka, it's true. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says, that he had tachlis sinas, and taka was for minimum apikosim. This is the only way that you could taka come to it. If I had to give an answer, b'derech after why Davar Melech taka hated them, it's because the tzaddik is pashat mos b'ra, pashat disgusted with bad. They say about Rabbi Yitzchak Kabyanovich, a chassid from back in the day, that there was a certain person he would do business with, a guy, or maybe a Frei Yid, I'm not sure, and he would always try to challenge his emunah, etc. He always had a good answer. Finally, at one point, this person said, we've been doing business for so long, why don't you come over to my house for a cup of tea? So I went over to his house for a cup of tea, and this person arranged that his daughter should come out and she should be dressed immodestly. And he wanted essentially to drive it into this chassid's sight, essentially. And when this chassid saw her, Yitzchak Kabyanovich, he vomited. He was disgusted with the bed. Kol sheken kal v'chomer, someone like David HaMelech, that tachlis sinas nesim is, in a real sense, that he hated them with the ultimate of sinah. Because he's mos b'ra, he's a tzaddik. I would also further, Tanya, if I'm going to be postulating, that this doesn't mean that David HaMelech didn't have a love for them. He had tachlis sinah. And as far as this person goes, you could say the body as it is, David HaMelech had tachlis sinah. Usually when you have a body, the body has a soul in it. And so to say tachlis sinah means even the soul. And how could you have even the soul? It doesn't make any sense. That's why the Alter Rebbe answers David HaMelech, tachlis sinah sinesim. But at the end of the day, David HaMelech, the neshama that was hovering over them, the neshama that was there milamayla, I think it's a Dover Borer Pasha, that David HaMelech had love. for the neshama, and ultimately the potential that the person could do tshuva. I think David HaMelech certainly would have a love for the person in that context. You can take it or you can leave it. This is just my thoughts. Ultimately, though, I think that the point remains that regardless of the fact that David HaMelech hated this person, I think that the point remains, or hated these people, the minimum, the apikoursim. I think that the point remains that Avos Yisrael is still a mitzvah that applies regardless. And ultimately, just to summarize the shiur very briefly, if without the mitzvah of eichacha, if you can't do meichech because you don't see yourself as being on their level, you can't come to the sinah. And that's the point that Alter Rebbe quotes, etc., etc. And yeah, l'chaim.